quarter. The Prime Minister's ranted earlier today at question time about what this government's doing for youth unemployment in this country. Could he tell us why it's increasing?
Well, every increase in youth unemployment is unacceptable. And I'll tell you exactly what is happening. In terms of 16 to 18-year-old young people not in employment, education and training, that number is actually going down. But the problem, as he rightly says, is people over the age of 18, under the age of 24, who are finding the job market extremely difficult. The reason that unemployment is going up is because we're losing jobs in the public sector and we're not growing them fast enough in the private sector. So we need to do everything we can to get our economy moving. The absolute key to that is keeping our interest rates low. We have interest rates now down at 2%, and if we followed his party's policy of extra spending, extra borrowing, extra debt, interest rates would go up, more businesses would go under, and we wouldn't get our economy moving.
George Eustace.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many members of this House will have encountered examples of banks using the threat of receivership to extract new charges and higher interest rates from their business customers. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it is wrong for banks to use what is effectively an extortionate bargaining position in this way? And would he agree to meet with me to discuss some of the proposals I've outlined to limit the power of receivers and to require banks to obtain a possession order before selling up small businesses?
Now, I'm very happy to meet with my honourable friend about this issue. It's absolutely vital that not only we get our banks lending properly and lending to small businesses, but also we make sure that they behave in an ethical and proper way as they do so. We're addressing the first issue in terms of the quantity of lending through the National Loan Guarantee Scheme and the other credit easing measures that the Chancellor set out in the autumn statement. But we also need to make sure that the practices that the banks follow are fair and seen to be fair. They have an interest in making sure that small businesses are in good health, and they need to follow those sorts of procedures to make sure that happens.
Sir Russell Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Youth unemployment in Dumfries and Galloway has risen by 65% over the last 12 months. And with the British Retail Consortium indicating that almost 1 in 3 jobs are filled by under 25s, does he recognise that the predicted squeeze on the retail sector will only increase the chances of youth unemployment increasing across the entire country?
Well, the thing that would put the biggest squeeze on the retail sector is if interest rates went up. Just 1 percentage point increase in interest rates would see the typical family lose £1,000 a year through extra mortgage payments. So look, everybody knows we are in a difficult economic situation and we have to take difficult decisions as there is effectively a freeze across the Eurozone. But the most important thing is to keep those interest rates low so that people have money in their pockets and we can see some good retail recovery.
David Rutsley.
East Cheshire Hospice and many other hospices across the country run Christmas tree collection services that help many families recycle their Christmas trees in an environmentally sensitive way. Can the Prime Minister join me at this festive season in supporting the great work that these charities do in collecting these trees to raise hundreds of thousands of pounds for the important work of our hospices?
I certainly join my honourable friend at this time of year particularly in praising the amazing work that hospices do. Many hospices don't receive a huge amount of government funding. They have to be very ingenious about how they raise money from people up and down the country and collecting and recycling Christmas trees so that we don't just leave them outside the house but do this thing properly, I think is an excellent idea, and I'm sure the whole House want to join me in praising the work that hospices do, particularly at Christmas time.
John Cryer.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has been promising legislation to create a register of lobbyists for the past 18 months, but nothing's actually happened so far. Will he either give us a publication date for a consultation paper leading to legislation, or he could take on my 10-minute rule bill, which is already published, and I'm a generous sort of bloke, so he can have it now and get it on the statute book.
Well, I'm a generous sort of bloke too, so I can tell him that the lobbying proposals will be published within the next month. And so this government will have moved faster in 18 months than the last government did in 13 years.
Adrian Sanders.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will have seen the news this morning of the study in the excess deaths of people with diabetes, unnecessary deaths if the condition is treated correctly. The National Service Framework for Diabetes comes to an end in 2013, Will the Prime Minister look at NSFs as a way of meeting the challenges that there will be on the health service and the health service budget and helping people with diabetes in the future?
Well, I'm very happy to look at the National Service Frameworks, as he says. I think the key issue with diabetes is both we need to raise the profile of this condition because many people have it and don't know they have it. But the key thing as well, I think, is to look at the public health issues because the explosion in diabetes is coming partly from bad diet and obesity in childhood, and we need to address those issues. Otherwise, we're always going to be dealing with the disease rather than trying to look for the prevention.
I'm in a generous mood too, and it's always a delight to listen to my colleagues, so we'll have a little more. Anne Maguire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, in the other place, the coalition government voted down a proposal to protect the benefits of disabled children by a majority of 2. Can I ask the Prime Minister that by reducing benefits for disabled children by over £1,300 a year is something that identifies his often repeated mantra that we are all in this together?
Well, first of all, we are not cutting benefits to disabled children, and actually we are uprating by 5.2% all of those benefits so that people will see an increase in the benefits that they receive next year.
Last but never forgotten, Mr. Brian Binley.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware that capacity levels on the West Coast Main Line are intolerable and getting worse. Does he share the concerns of rail users that delays to High Speed 2 will only make their journeys more unpleasant? And will he provide the assurance they seek about the future he promised them?
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this question. Clearly, the country has a choice. Because the West Coast Main Line is as congested as it is, we need either to replace it with a traditional line or a high-speed line. It's well known, the government's view is that a high-speed line is the right answer. That's why this consultation has been conducted. And I think it's not just good for people who want to use the West Coast Main Line, but also it'll be a successful regional policy in linking up our great cities, shrinking the size of our country, and making sure that all parts of our country can enjoy economic prosperity and growth.
Order. Statement. The Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, Mrs. Secretary Spellman. Can I appeal to honourable and right honourable members who are leaving the chamber to do so quickly and quietly so that we can all listen attentively to the right honourable lady, preferably facing the House or the chair while we are doing so. Mrs. Secretary Spellman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'm setting out the next stage in the bovine TB eradication programme for England. Bovine TB continues to be a major problem in England. In 2010, nearly 25,000 cattle were slaughtered in England, and the cost to the taxpayer is set to top £1 billion over the next 10 years. The problem is particularly bad in the west and southwest of England, where 23% of cattle farms were unable to move stock off their premises at some point in 2010 due to being affected by the disease, causing much distress and hardship. As I explained in my statement in July, cattle measures, including routine testing and surveillance, pre-movement testing, movement restrictions, and removal and slaughter of infected animals remain the foundation of our TB eradication programme. We have already strengthened cattle controls and will continue to do so. The government is working in partnership with the farming industry and the veterinary profession to further promote good biosecurity and provide advice and support to farmers. We also intend to invest a further £20 million over the next 5 years to develop an effective cattle and oral badger vaccine as quickly as possible. We know that in order to tackle this disease, we need to look at each and every transmission route, and that includes transmission from badgers to cattle. Ultimately, we want to be able to vaccinate both cattle and badgers, but there are practical difficulties with the injectable badger vaccine, which right now is the only available option. Badgers have to be trapped and caged in order to administer it. As I told the House in July, we are working hard to develop a cattle vaccine and an oral badger vaccine, but usable and approved vaccine are still years away, and we can't say with any certainty when they will be ready. In the meantime, we cannot just do nothing. This terrible disease is getting worse, and we've got to deal with the devastating impact it has on farmers and rural communities. It's difficult to quantify or put a monetary value on this, but a report by the Farm Crisis Network describes the feelings of panic, stress, and emotional devastation for farming families as they repeatedly have to send their cows to be slaughtered. I think we'd all agree that we need to stop the disease spreading further, to bring it under control and ultimately eradicate it. Evidence tells us that unless we tackle the disease in badgers, we will never eradicate it in cattle. No country in the world that has TB in its wildlife has been able to eradicate it in cattle without addressing it in the wildlife population. In July, I set out revised proposals for controlling the disease in the badger population. In order to reduce TB in cattle in the worst affected areas, we proposed to allow a controlled reduction carried out by groups of farmers and landowners as part of a science-led and carefully managed policy of badger control. The policy would be piloted initially in 2 areas in the first year. Following the responses to the consultation on draft guidance to Natural England that we launched in July, the policy has been further refined, and I'm now in a position to announce that we will go ahead with a pilot of the policy in 2 areas next year to confirm our assumptions about the effectiveness, humaneness, and safety of controlled shooting. An independent panel of experts will oversee and evaluate the pilots and report back to government, and we will then decide whether